It's Amy, and I'm here again with Tabitha. And today we are continuing our discussion on writing your characters. And now we're going to talk about character art. Hey, Tab.
Hi, Aim. Yeah, so I think in the last session we talked a little bit about how you bring a character to life on the page. Like, it's who that character is when you're beginning your story. You know, how old are they? What's their life experience? You can go back and listen to that. But you meet them at a certain place in time and in their history. And then you're writing your story, or you have this idea for, some kind of a story, and you're throwing them into that story. And I actually wrote an article, and I titled it The Intersection of Plot and Character Development, because that's where interesting things begin to happen, right? Is that you have this person who comes to you formed as they are in that moment, and that will make a difference whether they're older or younger, certain things. But nonetheless, they're going to have an experience over time throughout this story, an adventure, we'll call it. And if you think to the hero's journey, right, like the in the abridged version of the hero's journey, somebody leaves home on a quest, an adventure, meets people along the way, has the adventure, comes back changed, right? And that's super abridged. There's a lot more steps, but essentially
that is it though. That is it. And actually, I worked with, like, way back in my baby days as a writer, I worked a little bit with a developmental editor, and he said to me, every scene should have, the plot has moved forward, but I would also say is part of that character arc, that character development. And if it's not, no matter how pretty it is or beautifully written or whatever else you did in there, it's not useful. It all has to serve the arc of the character and of the story.
Right. It has to serve the story. And so, it's interesting then to watch your character. And we talk about this all the time, that they are in it and they will tell us how we think they're going to behave. Or sometimes when I come back around and I'm like, something isn't right in this scene, and I have a heroic character behaving too heroically, none of the flaws are coming out, none of the challenges of having thrown them into this world and had them put them through the ringer, they're not going to always respond. I mean, they have to enough times come out on the right side of things. But I had one of my main characters, she was just so exhausted and just so done in the moment that she couldn't do the thing that she could do to save everybody. She couldn't do it. And I'm like, that was made for a really authentic, really difficult scene to write, because I'm like, oh God, I really wanted her to come out, and it altered my plot arc a tiny bit, because I was like, okay, now I have to, get them out of this scenario that they dug themselves into, because she just couldn't muster. She actually had a full on panic attack in the moment and just couldn't muster. And that's based on what I put her through. That was the response. I didn't know she was going to do that. And I was like, oh no, she's just done. And I'm like, my poor Kaylee, she's just done, So, and then and that's where that intersection happens, where that did alter my plot slightly. I had to really say, now who will step up?
Right. So you have to honor that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to honor that. If your character is telling you, no, I wouldn't do that, even if you have the whole outline from that point that was going to go a certain way, if you don't do that, it's always going to sit wrong. You're gonna have to change it later. If you don't, you change it now or change it later.
Right.
You're going to have to. Yeah.
Yep. And and so that I think interrelates with so as the plot is moving along and the characters are changing, that's where agency comes into play. You can constantly have things acting and the character responding, but that proactive agency, they need to have agency throughout the story. It can't just be all responding to things, or we don't see them taking control. So after my character did that thing where she had her, but she was forced into dealing with some of her her issues, because she didn't want that to happen again. And so and that's where some agency can come into play. You also have to, related, I think, if you're going to put your characters through the ringer, if you're going to have them, and we write science fiction, fantasy, we write, really genre fiction kind of stuff. If you're going to throw your characters into this stuff, I think it's not authentic if there's not some trauma to them, drama and trauma. Like, if that doesn't work on them somehow, if they're not affected by it, then you have Superman. And Superman is my least favorite, heroic character, because I think he's just always the Man of Steel, always responds in a certain way, even when Lois, whereas I think Batman's way more interesting because he's got the inner demons and the life has beaten him down, and then he still rises above to do things, even if you consider him an anti-hero or whatever. That's a more interesting character, is the character that you the plot is acting upon them. You see their, the weight of that happening, and then you see them strive and overcome and get where you need them to go by the end, basically. So those are some things I think about with that intersection of plot and character.
And I'm realizing we've only been talking about protagonists,
right?
So
yeah,
that's
a whole nother conversation. The hero, the anti-hero, the villain. I actually do a panel at Worldcon and at different Comic Cons, and it's called "A Hero, an Anti-Hero, and a Villain Walk into a Bar," and it is on character development. For another day. It's for another day.
We've got to do that one.
Yeah.
What I would just say with your protagonist, and then also when we talk about those other characters, if anytime as you're writing with your character or scene or anything, when you have that niggling feeling like something's not right, it's not. So just spend the time finding out what it is. And maybe that's something you could do on a second pass, but if you could do it in the moment, it might, as you were saying before, it might change everything that comes next. So
yeah,
anything else?
You might not know as you're going through it either way. You might be thinking you're presenting a character in a certain way, and you won't get the feedback until later that that is not what people are reading. Then you have a thought process to go through of like, how do I create the character that I had in mind, deliver it authentically to my readers, and they're perceiving it in the same way. And that's another thing. But I think the more experience you get, the more you recognize when it's not happening yourself earlier. I think, if that character isn't quite, although I'll say, my one Bridget, you were the one who said to me, she's too much like you. She's a badass, and she's not badassy enough through the whole story. She doesn't hold her badassness. Is that, can we say that? Long enough.
Also, she's like a little, like, she doesn't like people.
She doesn't like people.
Nope.
And that had to come out more.
And the thing is, that had to be obvious. Like, she's a good
and you as the reader,
she doesn't like people. Yeah.
So you as the reader knew that's how she was supposed to be. I did a good enough job setting her up as that person, and I didn't carry it through long enough. And so that's where an outside reader can say, I know who you want this person to be, and I feel it, and I see it, and I've got a picture. It's not tracking all the way through, or it's tracking the arc, the change isn't consistent with the person you started with. Like, that's not the direction they would go.
It's distilling. And actually, like, you bring up a good point that if your beta readers are going back to our beta reader conversations, if your beta readers are coming back to you and saying, I don't think this one would do this, I don't think that one would do that, that does mean you've done a good enough job that they feel like they know who this character is. So pat on the back. And it just means like a little tweaking and honing, which you should be super excited about, because you nailed it with some work to do, but you've made it clear who they are. They should know, your readers should know what songs this character would like. Like, do they like ice cream? Do they eat breakfast? Do they make their bed? Your readers should know that. And that's really fun for readers when they get to know characters that way. It's those books that when you're nearing the end, when I'm nearing the end of a book I really love, I slow it down. I read.
You don't want to leave them.
Last per day. Yeah.
You don't want to leave them.
I want to be like bereft of this new family that I've gotten so attached to.
Right.
So yeah. So what are we going to do next? I mean, not necessarily now, but are we going to do our...
I think I'd like to dig into the heroes, the anti-heroes, and the villains. That would be fun. Let's do that next.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. It's Amy and Tabitha from Authors Buzz. Until next time.
Catch you next time.